All right, we're going to begin just with the basic question so we can establish. Just tell me in a complete sentence, I am Barbara Bielenberg, and my husband Bob and I settled in Red Hook. So
don't ask me what date, but it was before the bicentennial and before we acquired this. Okay, my name is Barbara Bielenberg. I was married to Robert Bielenberg, who was an artist and deeply interested in antiques and old houses. And we were looking for a place to move upriver in some place close to the Rhinebeck Aerodrome where our youngest son was working. And he looked at this building and he said, "Oh, that is a wonderful building." We went inside it and saw all the original mantels, and in spite of its decrepitude, he thought this would make a wonderful house and an antique shop, because we had an antique shop down in Cold Spring. And it seemed like a perfect place, except it was in such poor shape. And we finally were very wise and decided it was too big a project for us. But we always were interested in it. And when the bills started coming in and I realized how much it was costing, I thought, ooh, it's a lucky thing we didn't get into this. It would have wiped us out, but it was so worth doing.
So you came to Red Hook, and the Elmendorf was about to be turned into a parking lot.
That was one of the rumors. The other thing was that it was going to be bought by somebody who wanted to develop a restaurant. But we thought in order to do a restaurant, they've got to put in a commercial kitchen. It's really going to, we're going to lose some of the original material that we have here, and it's just not appropriate. So actually it wasn't us, it was Rosemary Coons, who was the village historian and also an employee of the only insurance company in town, I believe, at the time. So she knew everybody because they carried their insurance there. And she was determined that this building be saved. As village historian, she was just committed to it. So she got a lot of us interested in it. And the group actually was formed at the same time as the Red Hook Historical Society, which both the projects were kind of, I think, generated by the bicentennial, the years just before the bicentennial, when everybody was thinking history, and it was the thing to do for your community was to preserve the history. And so it was just realized that it was a separate project from the preservation of local history. And so it was decided that the Friends of Elmendorf would be one organization and the Historical Society the other one. But Rosemary was involved in both, and she was kind of a charismatic person in a way, and so she pulled a lot of people into it who might not have had an interest. And we were very indebted in the early years to an architectural draftsman by the name of Herman Gorgens, who took an interest in this project. And Herman did all the drawings, endless drawings that he had to make of the building in order to allow us to try to apply for state funding to do some of the restoration, to get it started. And the other person who I think of very fondly from the early years, who was also no longer with us, was Shirley Brown, who ran a thrift shop to begin with, which was one of our major, in fact, perhaps the only source of funding at the beginning, was just what she could make with junk. And she did a wonderful job, and it got people interested too, gave them a reason to come here, and gave us an opportunity to talk to people, and gradually interest, it grew. But it was a little daunting at the beginning, because this handsome room that we're sitting in now was really 3 rooms, and a stairway going to the second floor, because this building had been occupied as a two-family house. So this was the living room, kitchen, and dining room, and the stairway upstairs for this half of the house. And it was all pretty shoddy workmanship, so it really was, it made an eyesore of what had been a beautiful room. And this,
May
yes.
I ask, can you recall for us and just describe the, what I would call the shock of recognition that you and Bob had when you first took a look at the Elmendorf? How did you know?
Chris, also.
Well, we were both in.
Just a minute.
To repeat your question.
Yes, just repeat. When I ask a question, just repeat it back in your own words, yes. When we first looked at the Elmendorf.
Well, we were both very enthusiastic about historic architecture. My career had been working in historic sites and then promoting interest in historic sites and in tourism in the Hudson Valley. So that was my background. Bob was an artist. He loved antiques and he loved old buildings. And so we looked at this building and we realized it was an old building. And when we finally got inside it, in spite of all the breaking up of rooms like this and the room that eventually became the tap room, there were partitions that even intersected the beautiful mantels so that they'd been chopped in order for a wall to go in there. But you could still see what was behind there. And so if you treasured old buildings, you only had to look at a mantel like the one here or in the middle room, and you realized that this had been a very handsome building at one time. And it continued to surprise us as we worked on it, room by room. Starting with this room, we wanted one room that could be used for meetings and things. And so this was the first room that was finished so that we could open to the public. We felt the more times we could get people in here for whatever purpose, it would be helpful because they would see it, because the outside always looked pretty trashy. But you had to get inside and see the detail and realize it. So this room was finished first so that we could have meetings here. And then the middle room was done next. And when we began to do the middle room, in fact, when we just had this room only open, a young man from Connecticut, I think, who was a wallpaper historian, looked at that room and he said, you know, when you start stripping the old wallpaper off the walls, and when he meant old, he meant 1930s old, he said, be very careful because I suspect that underneath that is going to be some really historic wallpaper. And that turned out to be true. So we did go at it very carefully with the middle room so that we could preserve any remnants of the original wallpaper that were there. And it made it especially exciting because there were hidden treasures like that we found. And as we developed it, then we, preserved it and made it available to the public. And they gradually began to appreciate that in spite of the, excuse the expression, the crappy way it looked on the outside, it was a really wonderful building.
What were please tell us what some of the other treasures that you found, what were they?
Well, particularly the mantelpieces, which had been rather ruthlessly intersected by walls when they subdivided the rooms, like the one in the tap room, which is simpler, but then the purpose of the room we felt and kind of believed was a tap room, that it would be not as fancy as this room, which was we always considered to be the meeting room and the sort of most elegant room in the house. And we also entertained visits from people who were familiar with, the name escapes me now, but there was a relatively young man who was interested in historic preservation and had done a personal collection of houses on his father's property and made a kind of a little Sturbridge village, if you will, of his own personal, because when he saw an old building being torn down or ruthlessly treated, he would collect it and bring it to his father's property. And he came here and looked at it, and he clued us into some of the things that were really important about it. And to watch when you take out this wall or whatever, just be careful, because there could be something hiding behind, which often turned to be the case. I mean, the kitchen, which we have that has the original fireplace and bake oven, was completely hidden. And the people who lived here never knew that there was even a fireplace in that room, because it had been all covered over with cheap wallboard. And so that again was another surprise when we took the wallboard down and found behind it a fireplace and the entrance to a bake oven. It was, it was just one more wonderful surprise. The building became more authentic as the layers came off, and easier to explain to people why this was worth saving. So I think the general enthusiasm of the building just grew as we, unfolded one treasure after another. It was a wonderful experience to work in a building like this.
Part of the effort, a major part, it seems to me, was the, if you will, the marketing of history and local history and the Bielenberg. Could you just talk about how important that was and continues to be, the importance of...
Well, the whole effort to preserve local history, I think, grew out of the bicentennial. It was the nation celebrating its birthday, made all of us look at our own historic fabric and begin to value it. And so it was an easy thing to do. Whoever was in charge of promoting history for the bicentennial really did us a favor. And we had wonderful help from the state of New York. They had a historic sites program, which subsequently was run by Winty Aldridge, who was from Red Hook. And we were lucky that two of the curators, or I don't remember exactly what their title were, but they were in charge of historic sites, and they were members of the historic New York State Historic Preservation Program. One being the, oh dear, now my memory's going to go on me. Anyhow, let me just say that they were two executives with the New York State Historic Sites, and they lived here in Red Hook in an old house about a block away from where we're sitting at the moment. And so they were very enthusiastic about this building. They were Cooperstown trained. At that time, Cooperstown, and perhaps still today, had a very good program in historic preservation. And most of the people who worked in historic preservation for the state of New York were graduates of the Cooperstown program. So they not only had the information, they had the jobs, and they had the friends who would join in our effort and value this building, and could see through all the abuse that it had received that it was a valuable building. And so we were very much buttressed, in that. And it was not a hard sell, really, because although people had not been interested in historic preservation, particularly in this building, we did receive funding from the state of New York. And it was good that we had so many friends up there, because it was that funding from the state of New York that made it possible to get work done. And the first money that we received from the state had to be used under the floors where you couldn't see it, because the building was not totally stable. It needed a lot of work that you couldn't see on the underneath of all of this. So that was done first, and I can't remember how much was spent, but it was, for us, it was a lot of money. It was over $20,000, and my gosh, didn't show. What are you doing? I thought you had a grant. I thought you were working on this building. Well, we are, but it has to be where you can't see it, because if we don't support this, it's not going to do any good to work upstairs. So anyhow, that was done, and then we could start doing work that was visible and appreciated by the public, and uncovering this wonderful fireplace that we have in this room, taking down the walls, the partitions that had made this actually 3 rooms, and there was a stairway in the corner that went upstairs. All of that had to be removed, and the floor repaired. And it's interesting when you look at some of the history, the building is preserved here, because you'll notice in this room there was polyurethane used on the floorboards once they were cleaned up. We were never allowed to do that when we had state money that we were spending, because that polyurethane is not a period material. So no matter what, you have to just do the floors plain and scrub them if they get dirty. And that was a hard sell for a lot of people. Why can't we make the floors shiny and polished? Well, you can't. You're not allowed to. And the state was extremely helpful, not only in providing money for the restoration, but in forcing us to do it properly and not to give in to popular taste, which would have been a great temptation, because, of course, we all like shiny floors, but shiny floors are not in the period, and so we couldn't do that.
Who was in charge of making the decisions at what would happen and what wouldn't happen, aside from the state? Who was responsible?
Well, it was kind of a committee of Herman Gorgens, who was the architect draftsman that I think I mentioned in the first place, and Rosemary Coons, of course, maintained her interest in it. And then Shirley Brown, who was one of the principal fundraisers, because she ran the thrift shop, which brought a lot of attention to the building, because people could bring their junk to sell there. At the same time, they could buy things there. And I always thought that that was a great activity. And because it got people involved in it. And you like to get people involved for different reasons. And so the more people that you can appeal to for different reasons, the better you can do it. Of course, I was involved. I turned out to be the person that was sort of the go-to person, Herman and I. Herman would provide the documentation, the drawings, or whatever the state required. And I knew how to talk to the state, because my background was also in historic preservation. So we developed a rapport with the state employees. And it was helped, of course, also by Winty Aldridge, who became the New York State Director of Historic Sites, which meant that he was very much involved in the Historic Sites program, including restoration. We were very successful in getting grants as a rule, because we documented what we did. We didn't do anything unless we had the state approval. We bent over backwards to make sure that we did things the way they wanted us to do them, because they had the experts. Who were we to tell those people how to do things? If they said that you can't put polyurethane on the floor again, we didn't. We knew that they were right. So ever after, they were the bosses, and they appreciated that. And so they would like to come down and see it from time to time. And they really encouraged us to keep working. And we just did it room by room, because we only had money to do so much at a time. But we made this room available and looking well so that we could go on. And we had fundraisers for necessary things, like we got people to buy a chair because we needed chairs, and we wanted to get reproduction Windsor chairs because they would look right, even though they're not very comfortable. They certainly are what should be used in a room like this. So if you turn up the chairs, most of them have a brass plate underneath that acknowledges who gave the money to buy that chair. And they paid for the chair and somewhat a little more to use on restoration. So it was a good fundraiser. We had all kinds of things that we did.
We need to just take a break.
Just for a second.
He's just gonna change his bed for just a minute.
Okay, good.
Or is it this?
Yeah, you have to stop me. I intend to run on.
You're great.
I'm enthusiastic about this project, needless to
Just
say.
be weird that she hasn't mentioned my dad's role very much.
Your dad's role, yeah.
Yeah,
We're
yeah, a lot.
gonna circle
Okay.
back his back, because I wanna,
And also,
excuse me. Barbara, I'd like you to tell us about the family's commitment and leadership in this. They say that a little child shall lead them, and apparently you came here from, I believe, Garrison? Were you in Garrison?
Yes, we were in Garrison.
And you didn't like the idea of living across from West Point. You and your friends, the Seegers, thought that was a little, and anyway.
It got to be a little uncomfortable during the Vietnam period because we were all against the war, and here we were living within sight of West Point, and every night we had to hear their helicopters coming, picking up the brass and taking them back to Washington or wherever they took them to. But there was sort of a constant clamor of helicopters, and then in the summer, all the shooting, they, practicing. And not that we were against our army but it was just a constant reminder that there was a lot of war going on and a lot of practice for war. And so it made us think about maybe moving to a quieter, pleasanter place. And then our youngest son, who looked at all the college catalogs, and in spite of the fact that he was a very smart kid, he looked at them and he said, "They don't teach anything in these colleges. There's nothing I want to learn that they teach." What he wanted to learn was historic technology. And he loved working at the aerodrome and repairing the old airplanes. And he learned to make castings, brass or bronze castings for hardware so that that could be done correctly. And he was just very interested in it. So we found a house here in the village of Red Hook that had a nice old house where my husband could put his furniture that he liked so much, and where our son Reed would have an apartment to live in the barn and a workshop down on the floor. And our daughter Christina had graduated from a very liberal college up in Vermont where you could get a degree in almost anything if you could write a proposal that would be acceptable. And she had a friend who was interested in working with wood. And he had as his thesis, he had to make 25 different kinds of wood joints. So he used the workshop that my son Reed put together in the barn behind our house in Red Hook, and he made his samples of different. And then he went on to get a job working on Montgomery Place, and became eventually the head carpenter at Montgomery Place in the restoration of their fancy woodwork. So we felt like we were really in the historic preservation business with our choice of a house. In we even had an airplane in our driveway for a while. So it was great. All these young people were pursuing their interest in historic technology, and we were involved with the Elmendorf, and it was just, my husband was so interested in all of that this was just a great family project. And So it, you know, it was fun, and as you got more people interested in it and made them appreciate the building, it just grew. It just grew.
Who were some of the other people who, aside from Rosemary Coons and Shirley Brown, who were some of the other people who worked?
Well, Herman Gorgens, I have to credit him. I'm sorry that he's no longer with us, but he, because whenever we needed technical drawings, the state would ask for drawings, he could provide them. And that was, the communication with the state people was very important. And we got along very well with them because we appreciated what they wanted and we tried to give them what they wanted. And so they felt very confident with what we were doing here. And that was important. The Phalens got interested early, and they provided a sort of a stability to the project. And there were other people whose names escape me now, but the ones that I've mentioned to you were people that were just really important to us. And we kind of made it possible. Well, it was going to be done, let's just put it that way. We were so determined. And the more we did, the more we discovered that was wonderful about this building. When we got them fixed up, each room that we did became a treasure and something that really helped us sell the building and how important it was. And of course, when we uncovered the original kitchen fireplace and the bake oven, and then were able to restore the bake oven so that we could actually produce bread and cookies and things in this historic bake oven. That's something, you know, you go to historic sites and they're beautifully restored, but they're very precious and they can't be used. We could use this building. We could have meetings in our meeting room. We could dine in our tap room. We didn't serve liquor, which we could have or should have because it's a period thing, but of course we couldn't do that, but we used it. And every room, as we uncovered it, was used and provided an opportunity for people to come. And doing the kitchen was a great thing because when we got that done so that we could bake in the old bake oven, people never seen that done. You go to a museum where they're actually going to light a fire in the fireplace, a real fire, and they're going to actually use, you know, fire or coals to heat the bake oven. It can't be done anymore. They're too afraid of burning the building down. But we had good mechanics do the work so that we were confident we could use the bake oven without setting fire to the building. And it was just, we were lucky people would appear who had the expertise that we needed to do things properly. So the house almost seemed to have a charmed life. It was like it wanted to be restored. And whenever we needed the right talent, it would appear. And we were very lucky, and I wish I could remember the names of the carpenters who worked for us. That's sort of, I don't know why, I've got great gaps in my memory at my old age, but we had a team of carpenters who had been trained in a program that was set up by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And they had a school for historic restoration. And these two young men had studied there, and so they knew the rules. They knew how to look at a building and what to do with it, and they knew how to make restorations. They knew how to make copies when we needed to repair something. They knew exactly how to do it, and they worked with us through the whole process because they got interested in the project too. And there are other names that I can't remember, and I wish I could, because there was a wonderful young man, I think I may have mentioned him to you, who had collected old buildings and re-erected them on his father's property. So he knew a lot about how these buildings were put together. So he also knew how to read a building. And it was particularly valuable to us when we got to the, what we now call the tap room, because that room had been subdivided. In fact, the mantel had been chopped off in a section so that we could have an intersecting wall there. And as we stripped that back and revealed the original walls and got the mantel repaired and so forth, it was very helpful to have his advice, because he had done several taverns and knew what they should have and so forth. The one thing that we never reconstructed, because we were not absolutely sure how to do it, was the bar. We have a pretty good idea where the bar had been. We knew the story of bar and grill, which is something we now still use or used to use to describe a bar that also served food. But we had a bar and grill here.
Just, we're gonna get,
This feeling's gone.
We
You have to change car.
yeah, I'm gonna change cars again. Great, I'd like you to tell us that story about the bar and grill.
Yes. Well, that
But
was,
Just a minute, but before.
Now?
Just change- Not now.
It was,
Okay.
Mom, it was Don Carpentier. Don Carpentier?
oh, Carpentier, Don Carpentier.
Eastfield Village.
Good. He's still what?
Eastfield Village, I think he calls his place, or he calls his place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you,
Farmers.
Tina.
Because his father gave him okay. Now, I'd like you to tell us about the bar and the grill.
Okay. Well, we had gained the attention of a young man by the name of Don Carpentier, who I think I mentioned to you. He had collected buildings, including a couple of buildings that had taverns built into them. And so he knew what they were supposed to be like and what they needed to have. So one of the things that we never were able to document as closely as we would like to rebuild it was the bar and grill. We had marks on the floor which suggested that the bar was in a corner of the building. We had definitely, what shall I say, posts that came down that suggested that that was where the grill was. When we say bar and grill, we now think of it as a place to eat and drink. But originally it was a bar, like you would have in a tap room or a place to drink. And then there was a grill, which protected that from, it could be closed up at night by closing down the grill so that you couldn't get access to the liquor that was behind the bar. And that's where the name came from. And we discovered when we cleared the covering off the ceiling, we actually had holes in the ceiling where the grill had gone up into the ceiling. And so we had quite a lot of documentation, but for a number of reasons, we decided not to rebuild that because it would have to have been entirely speculative. And so we felt that we really could use that corner, that space better in the other purposes that we had for the room. And it became a place, though, of hospitality where we often serve food when we have meetings. We go to the tap room at the end, and the food can be spread out and the drink can be served there. And so we still did use it as kind of a place for hospitality, which it had been. And then it was adjacent to the wonderful kitchen, which was a great treasure as we restored that. But Don Carpentier was very helpful to us in many ways because he kind of kept in touch, saw that what we were doing was right. And so with his advice and then the advice we were getting from the state, we were really well supplied with information about how the buildings should go together. And then we have these wonderful carpenters who could help us by executing things the way we wanted them done.
What do you think, if you were to come back to this building in 50 years, if we were all to come back to this building in 50 years, what would you see here?
I hope the same thing that we're seeing now, that it's receiving public use. Fortunately, the Historical Society has been able to squeeze its archives into the upstairs of the building, and as their collection grows, they take up more and more of the second floor, but that's okay, because the second floor is not an area, we only have one staircase going up. And so the use of the second floor by large groups of people is a little problematic. I mean, we need to have a fire escape or something, and we weren't able to avoid having to do anything that modern with the building because our use of the second floor is somewhat limited and privately controlled by the Historical Society. So they let us get away with that one. Otherwise, we would have had to put a fire escape on the outside or something that was not be appropriate. So we've just been lucky. We've been very lucky and very much getting the cooperation of the public officials that we have to work with in order to make this building be done. And so we're very happy.
Could you just describe for us where a sense of history comes from in Red Hook? What do you think? This is a different town, and it's not Garrison. It doesn't overlook West Point. It's here. It's not on the river. It's just a plain old farming town.
Right, it is. That's true.
So tell us about Red Hook and how.
Well, I think having a building restored like the Elmendorf, which is made available to the public and particularly to school groups, is important. You need to get the children to understand. And the fact that this building stands here and has been so authentically restored gives the teachers a reason to bring children to the village. And many of the young people who go to our public schools, except when they go to school, don't come into the village very often. And so this is a way to give them something historic to look in. Then they do walking tours of the village, and the teachers have learned to point out some of the period buildings that are available. There's a historic cemetery just down the block from this. There just are different historic things, but the key to it all is really the Elmendorf, which is restored and can be used. And at Christmas, we have wonderful Christmas celebrations in which the children participate, often come and sing, or they come and the fireplace is being used, the bake oven is being used, and they can see this building in action as a place of hospitality. And I think it does a lot. When you have a historic building that's right in the village, they don't have to go to some private estate to see it. It's very much a working class building. It's not some palace that some rich person who made their money in New York has built overlooking the Hudson. This is the people's building. And we can also tell the story of the Post Road, which is our Broadway, which is our main street in Red Hook, as it always has been. And all of these things are still visible parts of history, but they do need to be pointed out. And the fact that this large place of hospitality is on the old Post Road begins to open up to, I think, young people and old ones too that look at it, the role that this road had, and the fact that travelers needed a place to stay, and this is one that's convenient. And there are other buildings along the post road that were used for hospitality, but they're now in other use, so they're not so available as an example of historic travel. But we have a bedroom upstairs that I hope that we can someday get furnished so that when children come on a school tour, we can show them what it was like when you traveled in those days, and how there was a bed that you always had 2 or 3 people in there, maybe not even a member of your family, but somebody else who needed shelter for the night. And that kind of thing that, most children have been to a motel. So, this is our motel, and they look what it is like. It's quite different in its use. And certainly when it comes to how people were lodged, there was very little. I mean, there's a nice big room up there where probably some people just laid a bedroll down on the floor, and that kept them out of the rain or the snow or whatever. And although there's no fireplace up there, it would get heat from down below. So anyhow, it's all ways to explain what life used to be like back in the 19th century, early 19th century.
I think that's,
I got a couple.
yep.
Well, I'm just curious because I'll ask you and not yell it across, but
Yeah.
Barbara was friends with Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
Did he ever come here? Better yet, did he ever play?
Tell us about Pete Seeger and coming here. How did you and Bob and the Seegers meet? And
Well,
did they ever come here?
Pete,
Bob, did Seeger
Pete
ever
did
play?
come here after Bob died. He did. We became friendly, particularly my husband became very close to Pete Seeger, because years and years ago when we lived in Garrison, Pete was brought to our house by a young man who was an artist like Bob. And the two of them often rode the train to New York to take their work in. And somehow, and I don't know how, this young man became a friend of Pete Seeger's. I think because he was a musician also on the side, and he played music with Pete. And anyhow, Pete came and got to know my husband, and he liked him very well. And the two men came, and they brought a book with them called Sloops of the Hudson. And Pete said, we need a reason, something to do that will bring people down so they can see the Hudson River. Because many people who live along the Hudson River never ever get to see it. Their lives are busy and they don't go to the water. If they don't own a boat, they don't have reason to do it. So he had this dream of making a replica of a Hudson River sloop, of which there were many hundreds of them sailing in the old days. And so they came to Bob and they said, do you know somebody who would be interested in this project, might be able to allow us to use their grounds to make a kind of an appeal and raise some money? So we introduced them to the Saunders family who lived in Garrison, and we knew that they were interested in environmental affairs. And they had a kind of a reception in the backyard and advertised that Pete would be there. And a lot of people knew his work and wanted to hear him. And so I remember he talked up this idea of the sloop. And that day we were actually raised $300 for the sloop. And it was the first money that they made. But because of the backing of the Saunders, then they were allowed to use a large piece of property on the corner of Route 90 and 403, which was owned by the Osborne family. And they made that available to us. And then they had their first sloop picnic there, which invited the public to come. And they had many musicians who were beholding to Pete or interested in appearing on the same stage as Pete. And I remember my daughter and I did spinning as sort of a craft thing on the side, and it was wonderful. And then they raised much more than $300 on that first sloop picnic on the Osborne's Field. It was the beginning of what became a major fundraiser, and finally we all very happily went up to Camden, Maine, and watched them lay the keel for the sloop, and it was built and has sailed the Hudson. And so Pete has always been a part of it. When my husband passed away, the children wanted the people of Red Hook to know that he was an artist, and they had never seen his work. It had never been on display locally. So the children really did the whole thing. I had nothing to do except to say it's a great idea. And they hung an exhibit of Bob's paintings, and particularly his artwork that he had done during World War II, when he worked for camp shows and traveled around to various hospitals and did drawings of the soldiers who were in their hospital beds. And these drawings were beautiful drawings. He was not a person who turned out cartoon-like drawings. He did old master type drawings, and they really were beautiful. And then the camp show people would photograph them so that they had wallet-sized reproductions of the drawing, as well as the original drawing that they sent to the wife or mother, whoever was most involved emotionally with the soldier. And so there was a display of his drawings, and those drawings really affected people. They saw them and they saw what a great draftsman he was. And so we really filled the meeting, the conversations took place in this room where the chairs were set up so that people could see here. And then the other rooms were all hung with his artwork and displays that showed his work. And we had pretty, it was run in an informal way, but I had kind of, I knew what should be done. And so I had engaged my grandson and a friend of his who used to sing together to do a song to begin the program, and then another to conclude it. And Pete came to this, and nobody ever asked Pete to sing. I think it was probably the first time that he came to something. He had his banjo with him and everything. But, I knew that the young people who were planning, they'd been asked to do the songs, and so he wasn't put out, he knew, and he went along with it. But it was a wonderful thing, and it was such a great place to do it because Bob had been so interested in the Elmendorf that it was a way that the Elmendorf paid him back by allowing his artwork to be displayed here and people to see how really talented he was, and more than just working on an old building.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. It's a
Lovely.
great pleasure. I can
Wonderful.
really go on this. It's something I'm still very enthusiastic about.